focus is on coral today. Is it a plant, an animal, a rock? Let's find out, starting right now.
Welcome to the Weird and Wacky Planet's Nature Just Got Real podcast for kids. Join KB Carr, author of the Weird and Wacky Planet series, with Chuck Darwin, Tito, and Captain Jack, as they bring you the real skinny on what's really going on in the natural world. And now, here's your host, KB Carr.
Hello, Planeteers. I'm KB Carr, author of the Weird and Wacky Planet series and host of this podcast for kids, Nature Just Got Real. Today we are finding out all about coral and coral reefs. But first, I want to welcome our new listeners in Germany, who again had the most downloads from outside the U.S. for the last episode. Also, for the first time, we had listeners in Nigeria and Switzerland. Welcome! And the city that had the most downloads was Frankfurt, Germany, and Bridgewater, New Jersey. Thank you so much for listening. If you are watching this on video, which you can do on YouTube and possibly other places, there will be pictures inserted here and there of the things that we're talking about, but if you are just listening and you are interested in seeing those pictures, you'll find a downloadable PDF in the show notes. It may be helpful to have that to look at while you're listening to the episode so you can see for yourself as we talk about them. Let's get started. While corals are a pretty common sight in the oceans, we don't always give much thought to exactly what they are. When you first look at them, you might notice that they look a lot like rocks because we are more interested in the fish and marine life that move around them. If you give it a second thought, you might think that they are some kind of plant. That's what I thought they were. Turns out I am wrong. Corals are marine animals. According to Shed Aquarium research biologist Dr. Ross Cunning, coral is an animal with plant-like cells living inside of it. Small individual coral polyps grow and divide to form large colonies that are the building blocks of coral reefs. As slow-growing organisms, a new coral will start as one polyp and then can grow and divide over hundreds or thousands of years to form colonies as big as a car or a house. Coral reefs are some of the world's largest living structures and can be seen from outer space. There are about 6,000 species of corals that we know of. Corals get their color from the algae that lives inside it. The algae living symbiotically, that's going to be a vocab word, within the coral gives it its color, and when the water is too warm, the algae leaves. This is when the coral becomes white or bleaching occurs. The coral then has only a certain amount of time to get the algae back if the water temperature cools off, or it will become permanent and the coral will die. To understand a bit more about coral reefs, the threats to them, and how we can help them, I talked to Marine Biologist Dr. Sharon Wismer, who specializes in coral reefs and even wrote a children's book about them. She is currently living in Switzerland and was unable to make it for a live interview, but sent me videos she made from the questions that I emailed her. And now, enjoy my interview with Dr. Sharon Wismer as she tells us about coral reefs, why they're important, and what we can do to help them.
Hi, Dr. Wismer. Welcome to the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Sharon Wismer, and I'm so excited today to be part of your podcast and to be able to discuss coral reefs with you guys, which is definitely my favorite marine ecosystem. So a very quick introduction about me. First and foremost, I'm a wife and a mother to 2 young kiddos. I have an 8-year-old little girl and a 6-year-old boy who, of course, are my whole world. I'm also a marine biologist and a children's outreach educator. A little background on my coral reef research. My master's, PhD, as well as my postdoctoral research were all conducted on Australia's Great Barrier Reef, with a heavy focus on coral reef fishes, predominantly coral reef fish behavior, but also how reef fishes respond to mass bleaching events. More recently, I've just published my first children's book all about the Great Barrier Reef and the most important reef fish that live on the reef that are responsible for keeping it healthy and helping it recover after a storm. And I definitely sound American. I'm actually Swiss South African. I learned English in America, so now I definitely have an American accent, but I studied also in Australia, and I'm currently living back in Switzerland with my family.
What are the benefits of coral reefs? Why are they so important to our planet?
So for those of you who don't know exactly what coral reefs are, I would give you just a quick introduction. So coral reefs are these incredible ecosystems that are marine ecosystems that occur all around the central part of the earth in the tropical regions where it's warm, the water's shallow, and there's a lot of sunlight, which corals need to grow. So coral reefs are obviously built by corals, but corals are actually made up of tiny little animals called polyps. And polyps are part animal, but they secrete a limestone skeleton, which is hard as rock. And they also have these tiny little plants inside them, or plant-like cells, algae, inside them called zooxanthellae, which photosynthesize and provide corals with most of their food. So when these different coral colonies all live together and they grow together, they form this hard three-dimensional structure on the bottom of the seabed. And that structure is what provides a home and food to thousands and thousands of other animals that it supports. So for example, coral reefs only cover 0.1% of the ocean floor, but they're home to a quarter of all marine species, or a bit more than a quarter of all marine species found in the ocean. So they represent this area that's relatively small with this incredible richness of life. And so they are these areas of high biodiversity. And that's one reason they're important for our Earth, is that we want to be able to conserve areas that have this high biodiversity or richness of life. Me, for one, I'm sure every parent out there as well, we want to have our kids grow up in a world where there's still a lot of beautiful animal life left. But of course, there's also lots of practical reasons for having coral reefs. So in Pacific Island nations where there's little space for agriculture, coral reefs are really, really important for providing food for people. So especially protein sources through fishing and some of the invertebrates that they eat as well. So they're a really important protein source. In lots of coastal areas, coral reefs are really important for protecting the coastline. So they create a bit of a buffer protection zone when there are storms that come in. Of course, tourism is a really, really big benefit to our planet for having coral reefs. They generate billions of dollars in tourism revenue, and that also means lots and lots of jobs for lots of people. So they support a lot of livelihoods. And finally, this is a bit more recent, but in the pharmaceutical industry, they have actually found that some reef animals that inhabit coral reefs, taking their compounds and creating different medicines for different human diseases like heart disease and dementia. So there are definitely lots of still unexplored opportunities on coral reef and to coral reef animals that could potentially still have a lot of medicinal value. So those are kind of the top reasons why coral reefs are really important for all of us.
Why are some coral reefs in trouble? What are the threats that our coral reefs are facing right now?
Threatened. So unfortunately, there's quite a lot of reasons why coral reefs are threatened around the globe. But the number one reason, unfortunately, is climate change. So climate change occurs when greenhouse gases are released into our atmosphere, and they form almost like a thick blanket around the earth. And this then traps heat from the sun, and it heats not only the land, but it also heats up our oceans. And although corals, they love warm water, but they don't love hot water. And when the waters become too warm, this little photosynthetic algae living within the coral tissue, which provides the coral with most of their food, when the water becomes too hot, the corals expel these zooxanthellae, which then means it's without its dominant food source and does become physiologically damaged. And this is when the coral turns white as snow. And that's also because the algae that's living within the tissue provides the coral with pigment or color. So during this phase, the coral is white as snow. It may actually look quite pretty, but it's very stressed out and it's starving. And if the water temperatures do not decrease in enough time period, different corals have different susceptibilities to different heating stress. But for that individual coral, if the water temperature doesn't decrease, that coral will die. And that's why coral bleaching and climate change is has such devastating impacts on coral reefs, because it has the potential to not just kill a few corals in a small area, but when there's a marine heat wave and thousands of colonies bleach at the same time, there's a huge potential, if the water temperature doesn't decrease in right amount of time, that large sections of the entire reef can be destroyed. And that's why coral bleaching and climate change have such devastating impacts on coral reefs. But unfortunately, there's lots of other things that also are impacting reefs. For example, overfishing. That's particularly a problem in the Caribbean and some Pacific Island nations, where when you're fishing a coral reef and you're removing fish species that provide a key ecosystem service like a herbivore, and you're overfishing fish populations, the entire ecosystem can collapse, similar to a bit of a domino effect. So overfishing is definitely a problem in certain parts of the world on coral reefs. Also tropical storms, so hurricanes or cyclones, no matter, depending where you are in the world. When these massive storms go over reef, they also have the potential to kill and destroy large parts of the reef. And in association with climate change, that these tropical storms are increasing in frequency, but also in the intensity of storms. So that's also something that coral reefs are having to face. Pollution is another, which I'm sure all of you have heard about. There's not just plastic pollution in the ocean, but there's also pollution from fertilizer runoff from agriculture, or chemical runoff, chemicals that go into rivers that head into the ocean. So any kind of pollution from land-based sources is something that a lot of coral reefs also have to deal with, especially the ones that are closer to shore and closer to rivers. Let's see, crown of thorns outbreaks. So that's something that's occurring, especially in Australia. Crown of thorns are these huge sea stars that have lots and lots of little spikes on them, and they've got lots of arms, and they are a ferocious coral predator. They can eat quite a lot of coral in a short amount of time. So they're part of the natural part of the environment, and which is okay, but the problem is more when there's outbreaks of these sea stars, when there's thousands or hundreds of sea stars making and eating their way through the reef. That can be a big problem. There are some management strategies to kind of help out with that, but it definitely is still a problem especially in Australia. And lastly, I think something not to forget is dredging. So when you're creating shipping channels and you're digging on the sea floor, it oftentimes creates sand plumes, where the sediment and the sand that's in the bottom gets suspended into these big sand clouds, if you will. And if these are over a coral reef, if you remember that the corals have these photosynthetic algae inside of them, which need the sunlight. So when they're covered and smothered in sand, they're unable to photosynthesize. In essence, the coral then gets smothered and it gets killed. And that could be a big problem as well. So unfortunately, coral reefs definitely fighting a bit of an uphill battle. There's lots of different threats that they're having to cope with.
What kinds of things can kids and families do to help coral reefs?
So with coral reefs having so many different threats, what can we do to help out? And the greatest thing is that the best thing we can do is to reduce our carbon footprint. And that's something that we don't need to be living right next door to a coral reef to help them out. So reducing your carbon footprint means reducing the amount of carbon that we individually are responsible for releasing into the atmosphere. So some of the best ways to do that are to fly less. And I know that's a bit sad because it's associated with vacation, but to take less international and national flights, and to perhaps take the train to your next destination. Something that we do at home pretty well is that we try to use a lot of public transport. We ride our bicycles most places, the kids walk to school or ride their bikes to school, and that we really reduce our daily car usage. Protecting local wilderness areas is also a way to combat climate change, is if you have a local forest or a local wilderness area, to make steps to make sure that that area gets protected. And of course, taking steps around the house to reduce energy use. So perhaps not using tumble dryer, but to hang dry your clothes. Use a little bit less air conditioning and these different things. Energy efficient appliances, for example. So those are all things that we can do on our daily lives to reduce our carbon footprint. And if you ever get the chance to visit a coral reef, I hope it's the most magical experience for you. And things to remember when you're actually underwater on a coral reef is to never touch anything. So don't look, definitely look and don't touch. And that's something that is for the safety of the animals on the coral reef, but also for your own safety. Of course, if there's any litter that you come across, definitely pick that up. And when you're planning your holiday or your vacation, that you go with tourism operators that are ecologically sound, that make ecologically sound decisions in terms of their waste management and recycling and etc. So those are some things that we can do at home to help coral reefs.
So you wrote a children's book about coral reefs. What inspired you to write the book?
So what motivated me to write my book called Keepers of the Reef? I think one of the main motivators was I wanted to just share my love and share the beauty of coral reefs for kids all around the world. So there's lots of kids that may not get the opportunity right away to be underwater on a coral reef. And I really wanted to just showcase these beautiful ecosystems to kids all over the world. So they really know when I ask them, hey, what's a coral? In the past, everyone would say, oh, I'm not sure. Slimy rock, maybe. Is it an animal? Is it a plant? Not sure. Not only did I want them to know what corals are, but also what kind of incredible animals call coral reefs home. My second motivation stems from a scientific background, and that is that as scientists, we're conducting all these experiments and finding all these cool, amazing results, but oftentimes these results get, stuck in the scientific literature. And I wanted to have a bridge or create a bridge between the scientific literature and the scientific community and the public, and to bring some of these amazing science to the public. And I feel like my book is quite a great example of that, because there's so much talk about the Great Barrier Reef and coral reefs all around the world being threatened. But very little talk about the reef fish species that are currently living on these reefs that help protect it and also help coral reefs recover after they've been damaged. So they really are the A-team of the coral reefs, and I wanted to shine a bit of a light on them and to show everybody how amazing they are and how complementary they work with each other, and that we need to protect them because they are the future of coral reefs for sure.
What would you like kids to know?
I think what stands out there is oftentimes I get kids coming up to me and saying, oh, Sharon, you're a marine biologist. That's my dream. I want to be a marine biologist, and I want to be a marine biologist, and everyone wants to be a marine biologist, which, I love it. I think it's so amazing. And I'm always like, great, what would you like to do as a marine biologist? And oftentimes then kiddos are like, not sure. I haven't really thought about it. So that's a great place to start. If you have interest in marine biology, try to figure out where that interest really is, in what kind of animals do you like the best and what ecosystem you like the best. So things you can do is volunteer at different organizations. You could go to marine biology camp, watch lots and lots of documentaries, and figure out really where your passion lies in the field of marine biology, because what we do as marine biologists, oftentimes we specialize on a smaller field. So I specialize really on coral reef fish, but I may not know so much about the polar environments or the deep sea or kelp forests, for example. And so once you figure out what you really, really like, that can really help you decide what university to go to, and to have professors at those universities who also focus on those things that you like. So I went to a university that focused heavily on coral reefs because that was what I was passionate about. But if you like kelp forests more and you would like to have a career more in temperate areas, that you could choose universities that also cater to your interests. So that's something that's really important. And at the same time, don't close yourself off. So expose yourself to lots of different options and lots of different environments and lots of different animals, because you may end up liking something that you didn't even know existed. So that's something I definitely would love kids to know. But I wanted to quickly share my new book with you. So it is called Keepers of the Reef, illustrated by Alice Wong, and of course written by me. And it covers everything from basic coral reef ecology, and then with a strong focus of the competition between corals and their main competitor, algae, and how the Great Barrier Reef has these incredible reef fish that we call the keepers of the reef, which are responsible through different jobs of keeping the reef healthy and helping it recover after it's been damaged. So in case you're a teacher or a science-savvy parent, I've also created free worksheets that can be downloaded from Sea Kids Alliance Instagram, which has a questionnaire as well as a word puzzle, coloring sheets, and labels, diagrams to label and match to sample kind of activities, as well as species fact sheets on each one of the important reef fishes of the Great Barrier Reef, and those can be printed at larger poster sizes as well. So those are all available for free on my Instagram at Sea Kids Alliance. And lastly, thank you so much for letting me be part of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something about coral reefs. And as I always say to my own kids, get outside as much as you can while you have free time and you don't have a 9-to-5 job. Try to explore as much as you can. It doesn't matter whether you live next to a meadow or a marshland or a forest or a bush or a desert or the beach. Or if you live in the middle of the city, there's oftentimes so much bird life and other little critters that live in cities. Try to get outside as much as possible and be connected to your environment and learn and discover and take it all in. And once you see nature, or you appreciate nature, then you start really seeing it pop up everywhere all around you. And I think it's so amazing to be connected to where you live and to be appreciative of all the animals that we share our lives with. So I wish you guys a lovely day, and thank you so much again for listening, and happy reading and happy exploring. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed learning about coral reefs with Dr. Wismer as much as I did. And now here's a word from our sponsor, Weird and Wacky Planet.
Have you ever seen a dragon covered in fingernails? How about a mermaid who vacuums the ocean floor every day? Or a pocket Dracula no bigger than your thumb? You can meet these animals and more in the book Weird and Wacky Endangered Creatures 1, part of the Weird and Wacky Planet series by KB Carr. Look for them wherever books are sold and get your flippers on your own coffee.
Now Chuck Darwin is going to tell us about a big word that I've been pronouncing incorrectly for a while now. What do I mean? Tell us more, Chuck.
It's time for the weird and wacky, weighty, wondrous word.
For this episode, the word is cnidarian. What is it, and why does it start with the letter C? First, we'll start with what it is. The dictionary describes it as a noun that means any invertebrate animal such as a hydra, jellyfish, sea anemone, or coral that is characterized by special stinging structures in the tentacles surrounding the mouth. Now, as to how you pronounce the word, the C is silent and the I is long. It comes from the Greek word nidos, which also starts with a C, and means stinging nettle. If you touch any cnidarians, it will be a painful reminder to you of how they got their name. Use the word cnidarian in a sentence today and impress someone with your genius. Until next time, I'm Dr. Chuck Darwin. Cheerio.
Thank you, Chuck. I had been pronouncing it cnidarian, so now I know the correct pronunciation, and that's always good to know. Captain Jack is here to answer a question that came up during our research for today's show, and you might have this question too. Give us the facts, Jack.
Got a question? Ask the captain.
Ahoy, mateys! In this episode, today's Ask the Captain question is, what makes coral an animal when it looks like a plant? I mean, it doesn't move, lots of them look like rocks, and lots of others look like flowers, am I right? So here are 4 facts about corals that prove they are an animal, not a rock or a plant. Number 1, corals are alive and rocks are not, so they are definitely not rocks. Number 2, plants make their own food and corals do not. They eat plankton and small fish. Number 3, corals have a mouth and a stomach. Each coral polyp has a stinging tentacles that they use like harpoons. Cool! Number 4, corals are cousins of animals like jellyfish and sea anemones, who also sting stuff with their tentacles. Well, you can see the resemblance. And there you have it. The next time you see coral, either in the wild or in a tank, now you know you are looking at a marine animal, not a rock or a plant. And if you have any questions for me, just email me at naturejustgotreal@gmail.com. I'm always listening. This is Captain Jack signing off till next time. Bye-bye!
That was an awesome answer, Jack. I don't think I understood that some corals look like rocks and some look like plants, but they are all animals. I still like the word plantimal, though. It's just a fun word to say, plantimal. I'll also put some great pictures of the different kinds of coral in the downloadable PDF so you can see some of the different species for yourself. Look for that in the show notes. And now here's Tito to tell us about one of the superheroes of the reef and some weird and wacky facts about its superpowers. Take it away, Tito.
And now, the weird and wacky creature feature.
Today, I want to tell you about an endangered species of fish that is a big defender of coral reefs, and that is the Humphead Wrasse, the hero of the reef. Why is the Humphead Wrasse a hero? Because his favorite food is the crown of thorns starfish. So what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Nothing. We are not even talking about tea or China. But it has everything to do with coral reefs because the crown of thorns starfish also has a favorite food, and that is coral. So the Humphead Wrasse helps keep the population of these coral-eating predators in check, and that creates a more balanced ecosystem. And here's a few fun facts about this underwater superhero. Number 1. The male Humphead Wrasse can grow to be 6 feet long or more. The biggest one on record is almost 8 feet long and weighs 420 pounds. It's one of the largest fish on the reef. Number 2, it's wicked smart. It will crack open a sea urchin by moving its head really fast and smacking it up against a rock. Number 3, it's an umbrella species, meaning that it's surrounded by many species with the same needs. So if the Humphead Wrasse is having troubles, many of those species will be having the same troubles. Scientists can monitor the health of the reef by monitoring the Humphead Wrasse. Number 4, its lifespan is from 30 to 50 years. That's a long time for a fish. But by far, the biggest fun fact about this fish is, number 5, the Humphead Wrasse are all born as females. Yep, they're all born girls. Then, when they reach the age of around 9 years old, some of them mysteriously turn into boys. No one knows why or what triggers the change. Can Aquaman do that? I don't think so. So there you have 5 fun facts about the Humphead Wrasse that you may or may not have known. Remember that these guys, or girls, or whatever, are on the endangered species list, and they need to be protected because they play a huge role as coral reef defenders. They have a few different superpowers going for them, don't they? Aquaman. I'm Tito, and I'll see yous all next time.
Thanks, Tito. Wow, that is crazy that all Humphead Wrasse start off as girls and then some turn into boys, huh? At 9 years old. It's a long time to wait for that change. I guess it would be less of a hassle if your parents could name you something that would go either way, like Pat or Sam or Riley. Okay, episode recap. What are my takeaways from today? Number 1, coral is a marine animal even though it can look like a plant or a rock. Number 2, climate change, which warms the water, can cause bleaching and massive coral die-off. Number 3, coral belongs to a class of species called cnidarians, and even though it begins with the letter C, the C is silent.
Cnidarian.
Just like that. Number 4, the Humphead Wrasse is a real unsung hero of the reef. There is so much more to this fish than we know, right? It's a VIF, which stands for Very Important Fish. Number 5, corals face a lot of different threats, but we can help them by slowing climate change and reducing our carbon footprint as individuals. Another thing we can do is reduce our use of plastics and organize litter cleanups, since a lot of litter eventually makes its way into our oceans. And here is something you can do right now to help coral reefs. Choose an environmentally friendly sunscreen. Some of the ingredients in regular sunscreens are toxic to corals. I'll have a link to my blog post about the best ones out there today in the show notes. What are some of your takeaways from today's episode? And don't forget to check out the recommended reads and all the things in the PDF you can do to both have fun and help protect the coral reefs, even if you don't have one near you. Also, starting next Monday and every Monday this summer, we're going to release a very small activity podcast that we are calling a minicast. Each minicast will have a play sheet that goes with it so you can participate, as well as a project that you don't have to do, but you can check it out if you want to. Until next time, go have a stinging rock-like plantimal adventure in your neighborhood.
That wraps up the show for today. Thank you to our sponsor, Weird and Wacky Planet. And thank you for listening. Thank you for caring, and thank you for sharing. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Let us know if you do, and we might mention you on the show. Until next week, go have an adventure in your neighborhood.